It's a pleasure to follow the noble Lady Baroness Altman. That was so well articulated, passionate and thought-provoking. And I also echo and hear her comments on Lady Meyers' exemplary work on this issue. I have previously expressed concern that this bill is too widely expanding the definition of domestic abuse, because I worry that some categorisations of abuse, such as emotional and psychological abuse, are too subjective and broad to guarantee justice. And every time I look, there's a new category of abuse added. We've just heard from the noble Lord Wolston of Tredegar that we now have spiritual abuse. And even the focus on domestic abuse is endangered as we stretch what constitutes the word domestic far wider than I think is helpful. My concern is that too much is being thrown at the bill, and that means that agencies and the police won't be able to see the wood for the trees. I'm not just going off topic in relation to this amendment, because I raised those caveats in relation to the issues around this amendment at committee stage. But I am now satisfied, having done a lot of research and mulling it over, that this is one amendment and one area where the bill can usefully cover. It is well and truly domestic, because it's about parental relationships with children. And if ever there was a concrete example of abusive coercive control, it has to be in using children against their parents. But I think that this form of alienation is specific in terms of a form of controlling behaviour that needs to be acknowledged somehow in the legislation. Any one of us who have had any personal experience of toxic relationship breakups will be more than aware that in some instances the understandable hurt that can lead to nastiness can spill over into weaponising children against one or other parent. And when this becomes systematic alienation, then maybe the law is useful and necessary to step in. Because what can't be denied is that the consequences of being alienated from one's own children is tragic and devastating, and people in that situation have very little resource to justice. Think of the consequences. You often can't see your child or children because of the alienation. Your children are told of the most heinous accusations against you, their views poisoned against you. And at the very least, one might therefore expect, because of that, that supporters of this bill would be sympathetic to children being coerced or alienated in this way. But instead, there's been an enormous deluge of organised lobbying against this amendment, which would be fine, but it's taken a particularly aggressive and hostile form, as hinted at by the noble Earl Linton, and I find that worrying in and of itself. One of the main arguments used is that parental alienation is a tool used fraudulently by abusive fathers to gain access to their children. But this very accusation, in and of itself, is sadly used to demonise those supporting this amendment, who are accused of being apologists for abusive fathers. The emphasis of the amendment's opponents on this is on the danger of false allegations of alienation. Now, I too worry, and I've said throughout the discussions on this bill, about false allegations, especially in relation to such emotive interpersonal matters. It's one reason why any allegations must not be automatically accepted as truth or fact, and need due process and need to be sensitively interrogated. But that is true of all allegations, including allegations of domestic abuse. If this amendment can be misused for false allegations, then the whole of this bill can be misused and lead to more false allegations, but I don't think we should halt this bill. Actually, in two instances in which I've known of parental alienation, fathers were falsely accused of domestic abuse, by the domestic abuse of the mothers, before they were totally cleared of any wrongdoing, by the way, and the mothers admitted that in the bitterness that they'd over-egged what they'd said. But think of what had happened. This was after the fathers' reputations were trashed, their children was told their father was effectively wife-molesting monster, and it caused great misery that was endured by the extended families in both instances, that affected the well-being of the children, totally cruel, very hard to get over. So in that instance, I don't think we're talking about abusive fathers using this, but rather innocent people being turned into being accused, and they themselves are actually victims, not abusers. And children are also victims here, because both parents should be equally open to for their children, as has been mentioned by various people. And I just think that there is something very specific about this amendment that needs to be considered. So if anything, I'd argue that we accept this amendment in whatever form, that all allegations of any sort of coercive alienation or abuse are properly scrutinised in family courts by the criminal civil law, but that we must show real care in accepting, when we accept whoever's side version of events in matters of this nature. Just finally, some scepticism has been shown, both in the lobbying that I've received, but also in what's been said so far. Scepticism has been shown towards 35 years of clinical, legal and scientific evidence that's backed up this issue of parental alienation. And we've already heard today people saying, well, what kind of experts are they? Can we trust this expertise? Yet throughout this bill, to be frank, we've heard all sorts of evidence that's been cited as though it's fact, even when it's been contested. But it's largely been nodded through. Experts have been quoted without anyone querying it. So I just worry that there's a certain one-sided nature to the hostility to this amendment, when I actually think it's absolutely reasonable and fair that it's brought into the law.
Lord Balfe, who